Good morning, AWS, and welcome to the AWS Morning Brief for September 2nd. Good morning, and happy September. Wake me up when it ends. I'm coming at you from Southern Maine this week. I'm cloud economist Corey Quinn. What did AWS get up to last week? Well, we'll find out in a moment, but first, this episode of the AWS Morning Brief is sponsored by O'Reilly's Velocity Conference. There's a discount code for you that I'll give you in a minute, but at a high level, if you want to get ahead today, your organization needs to be cloud native, or at least pretend to be cloud native. The 2019 Velocity program is running in Berlin from the 4th to 7th of November. That's right, it's called Velocity, but you now know not only how fast it's going, but also exactly where and when it is. There are a lot of fantastic guests speaking, like Jennifer Davis, Liz Fong-Jones, Heidi Waterhouse, and a lot more. Get insights on topics like chaos engineering, cloud-native systems, emerging technology, serverless, production engineering, Kubernetes, and other exciting buzzwords that are sure to shape our technological future. Listeners to the AWS Morning Brief can get 20% off of most passes to Velocity by using the code AWS. Register at velocityconf.com/AWS. That's velocityconf.com/AWS. My thanks to Velocity for supporting this ridiculous podcast. Amazon CloudFront expanded its presence in the Middle East with its first edge location in Bahrain. How did they build and launch an entire region with 3 availability zones, but not manage to stand up a rack of servers to run a CloudFront POP? I'd love to know. AWS Chatbot now supports notifications from AWS Systems Manager and will support messages as well from your manager telling you, hey, let's talk, and then not get back to you for 2 hours as you imagine you're fired. A regional expansion for EC2 instances, specifically the A1 family. This is built on top of AWS's in-house ARM processors. They call them Graviton, because why waste a good name like Graviton on something that people care about? Instead, they gave it to a processor. Good for them. Spot instances are now available in the AWS GovCloud East region, which is fantastic because, as we all know, if there's one thing the government is all about, it's saving money. Amazon ECS now exposes runtime container IDs to APIs and the ECS console, proving that every day in every way it gets a little bit more like Kubernetes. Speaking of Kubernetes, Amazon EKS is available in the Bahrain region. I don't know what the peace process in the Middle East is going to look like, but I do know that it's going to be the exact opposite of Kubernetes. Amazon Elasticache for Redis adds support for customer-managed keys in KMS for encryption at rest. Terrific. There are all kinds of problems with Redis, but now at least encryption should be one less. Amazon Route 53 now publishes query volume metrics for public-hosted zones. Fantastic. I finally get database analytics around my favorite service that I misuse as a database. Amazon SageMaker launches managed spot training for saving up to 90% in machine learning training costs. That's fantastic, because if there's one group of people known to be extremely cost-conscious and frugal, it's people trying to pour that machine learning snake oil all over things. It can search large quantities of data and find anything except a business model. SageMaker also supports exporting Jupyter logs to Amazon CloudWatch. All roads lead to CloudWatch eventually. AWS Global Accelerator now supports client IP address preservation for application load balancers, so finally you can tell who your customers are rather than wherever they happen to enter AWS's network. AWS Glue, the successor service to AWS Horse, releases binaries of Glue ETL libraries for Glue jobs. In other words, no matter what you're using, you can now pay Amazon for the privilege of ETL. AWS Managed Services is now available in a whole bunch of other places, including Ohio, Mumbai, Seoul, and a bunch of others. Now, AWS Managed Services isn't really something we talk about a lot because we try very hard to forget that it exists. It's effectively a group of people doing pro services level work inside of AWS where they manage your entire environment for you. proving that there is absolutely no AWS partner that will not feel the cold grasp of death sooner or later when Amazon gets around to it. But enough about sad things. Let's talk about something happy. Are you moving to the cloud? Perhaps you're already there. Logic Monitor is our sponsor this week as well. LM Cloud from Logic Monitor can help maximize your investment in AWS. They have automated discovery, pre-configured logic modules, built-in alert thresholds, and out-of-the-box dashboards. With Logic Monitor, you get better visibility into cloud workloads alongside your legacy on-prem environments, granting you a single pane of glass into your entire distributed infrastructure, which is a different kind of pane entirely. If you'd want to learn more about how LM Cloud can make your team more efficient and effective, please check them out at logicmonitor.com. My thanks to Logic Monitor for supporting this ridiculous podcast. AWS Systems Manager Advanced Instances are now available in the Chinese regions. Fantastic. Systems Manager anything at this point, you have a 50-50 shot as to whether it exists or I'm making it up to make fun of their terrible, terrible name. Someone should be fired, and that person is probably the AWS Systems Manager Marketing Manager. AWS Systems Manager Distributor is now available in the Chinese regions as well. And that's right, there's a Systems Manager Distribution Manager. It feels like I'm telling the same joke because they keep releasing the same freaking service. AWS X-Ray now supports Amazon SQS, given that SQS was arguably the first or second, depending on who you ask, AWS service to launch. All we can say is, it's about time. Not content with your existing lack of faith, container monitoring for Amazon ECS, EKS, and regular Kubernetes is also now available in Amazon CloudWatch. Eventually, CloudWatch is going to replace Route 53 as my favorite relational database. AWS has released something called the Machine-to-Cloud Connectivity Framework. That sounds fascinating. The problem is they gave it a name called the Machine-to-Cloud Connectivity Framework, guaranteeing that regardless of what it is, no one is bold enough to actually click the link to find out. There are lower thresholds available for AWS WAF, or Web Application Firewall, rate-based rules. Instead of 2,000 requests being the minimum to trigger it, it now drops to 100, meaning that you don't need to be incredibly popular to pay for WAF. You can now forward traffic between a local and a remote port using AWS Systems Manager Session Manager. That's right. You can forward X11 over it now, which means you can use Systems Manager Session Manager Window Manager. The Systems Manager folks have been busy this week. They also support resource groups as targets for their run command option. So you could wind up having a resource group called all instances that I have tagged as unlucky, and they get my latest deploy first. Also, Session Manager now lets you interactively run individual commands on instances. I've got to say, Session Manager is increasingly useful. With Run Command, it lets you do a whole lot of different things, but I just can't get over the ridiculous naming convention. Nuvoton NewMaker-IoT-M487 is now qualified for Amazon Free RTOS and a VP job naming things at AWS. PostgreSQL or PostgreSQL or Postgres or PostgRE 12 Beta 3 is now available in the Amazon RDS database preview environment. It's an early taste of terrible things coming to you soon. You can suspend and resume scaling in AWS Application Autoscaling now. Most folks don't know that Application Autoscaling exists, largely because there are so many services, it's impossible for us to keep track of them. That's why we have this ridiculous podcast in the first place. And lastly, in the world of creepy, the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam can now be taken in your home or office 24/7 as you're proctored remotely through your webcam. If they hear another human being on your end, it's instant fail. So if you have a child for which you're responsible for caring, make sure that they are passed the hell out before you begin taking the test about cloud computing. That's all that happened last week. My name is Corey Quinn. I am a cloud economist at the Duckbill Group, fixing the horrifying AWS bills wherever I happen to find them. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider checking out my other podcast as well, Screaming in the Cloud, available wherever fine snark is sold, as I interview people who are actually good at things. See you next week if I survive the wilds of Maine.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.